All right, let's get started. Welcome to all of you, viewers in the Zoom, viewers on YouTube, and welcome, of course, to the speakers. This is the health panel of Clingendael's State of the Union conference on Europe caught in Poly crisis. My name is Louise van Schijk. I'm the head of the EU and Global Affairs unit at the Clingendael Institute, and I'm the moderator of today's session. And I will do this together with my colleague Remco van der Pas. Remco, hi, maybe you can wave. Remco is a senior associate fellow at Clingendael, and he is normally based at the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp or lecturing at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And together, Remco and I just published today a policy brief on recent developments in EU health policy. And you can download this on the Clingendael website, or you can find it by looking at our Twitter accounts. Today, we're going to discuss this issue of EU health policy and the many events that are unfolding in this field in the wake of the COVID crisis. And we're going to do that with three distinguished speakers. First of all, Sarah Wheaton from Politico Europe, senior health reporter, and previously in the US. Then we have Anniek de Ruijter, associate professor here at the University of Amsterdam, and working already for many years on EU health law and security. And Sylvain Giraud, he's the head of unit at the DG, so the Commission Ministry for Health, DG SANTE, and he's responsible currently for medical products, the quality, safety, and innovation of these products. So with them, we will have a conversation how the corona crisis has affected European cooperation in the field of health. It's also possible for you to participate, and you can do that by using the Q&A function that you can access at the bottom of your screen. And my colleague Remco will collect the questions, and at some intervals I will ask him, Remco, are there any questions? And if time allows, we might also ask people to come in and pose the question themselves. Please also feel free to tweet about this webinar. We have established a hashtag SOTEU 2020, so State of the Union EU 2020. And we already witnessed quite some interesting developments on our Twitter channel. So now let's not waste more time and see what our speakers can bring to the table. Sarah, I would like to start with you. You're a senior health reporter at Politico. And prior to moving to Brussels in 2017, you followed also health policies in Washington. And you also told me that you've already voted for the presidential elections of today in the US. One thing that is very puzzling in the field of EU health policy, and people having looked at it, is that it's a field where the EU only has very limited competences. And I wanted to ask you, in which ways has this affected the capacity to address the COVID-19 outbreak? And what could the EU have done if health was a more Europeanized policy field? So how could it have better maybe addressed the COVID pandemic at its outbreaks? Sarah, please.
Well, yeah, so we saw a real tension between one of the most important freedoms of the EU, which is the freedom of movement, the freedom of people, freedom of goods, and this lack of authority for Brussels to make major rules related to public health policy. And so we had people exercising their freedom of movement. And of course, that meant the virus was free to move about the continent as well. And we saw in the very early stages sort of abrupt border closures, lack of coordinated rules. We also saw some countries impose bans on sending personal protective equipment to other countries, even within the European Union. I was actually just going back and looking at Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's sort of initial early reaction to this. And as she put it, amid charges that we have a fair weather union, some people refuse to share their umbrella. And so even now we're still seeing challenges as far as countries having different testing policies, different ways of defining a case, a coronavirus death. Belgium always likes to claim that that they have a higher death rate because they are more likely to define something as a coronavirus death than other countries. Luxembourg has complained that they are being responsible in testing everybody, and so therefore, especially in the summertime, we saw them have a higher rate. So we see a lack of coordination of policies, but also a lack of even shared understanding of how countries are doing and how bad their cases are relative to others.
Mm-hmm. Right, thanks. Yeah, so that's a bit the corona nationalism, as Remco and I have called it in the policy brief, and many others have already coined that term before us. So what can we learn also from this early phases about the EU's abilities in crisis management? So you were already referring that sometimes it was said that the EU is only there if it's good weather, but this is of course obviously very bad weather. And can we also consider the current vaccine strategy that has been proposed and the efforts the EU invests now in joint purchasing of a vaccine is a positive example of EU crisis management?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, so far, as for the vaccine efforts, so far the advanced purchasing effort seems to be going well, which is that the Commission is negotiating with pharmaceutical manufacturers to buy in advance experimental vaccines. They may not work, but regardless, there are, I think, 7 vaccines now that the Commission has acknowledged pursuing, and in many cases has signed deals. And they will then distribute, countries can basically buy from the Commission. Now, Health Commissioner Karakidis has been going around and saying, look, the Commission is buying these for you, but now member countries, it is your responsibility to get these shots into your citizens' arms. We can't do that for you. We can't make the decisions about who gets it first. We can't really do that much to help you make sure that you have the infrastructure as far as health professionals who are trained to do this. The next step is going to be for the capitals and for local governments. As far as lessons learned, we are seeing that and Sylvain can speak to this more, I'm sure, but we're seeing a push for more authority for the European Centers for Disease Prevention and Control. A lot of people, I think, imagined that they were similar to the US CDC, which has quite a lot of scientific heft and ability to make guidelines, whereas the ECDC can, and I apologize, my dog is making noise in the background, but the ECDC can kind of make suggestions, but they don't have much power, and there's even there was resistance from some countries to them even doing things like making a color-coded traffic light system for how bad a given country's outbreak was that would help determine travel. So there is a push to have more authority for the ECDC. Another thing we're very interested in is an effort to create an EU BARDA. So that's also inspired by a US agency that kind of tries to create vaccines and treatments for emergent pandemics before they even occur. It gets a lot of public funding, and a lot of the vaccines currently in the pipeline for coronavirus, come from US taxpayer money for research, and President von der Leyen has proposed to creating a similar thing at the EU level as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that's really quite big developments, because the production of medicines, and we will come to it when we speak with Sylvain Giraud from the European Commission, has almost ceased to exist from Europe. And now all of a sudden we realize we might want to have something of that back, and we also want to invest more in the research capacity. And we might also want to combine or strengthen the ECDC, European Centre for Disease Control, and not only rely on the national, in the Netherlands we call it RIVM's, because they have also not equal capacities, and they also don't have all the wisdom on these complicated questions of whether to send children to school or not, and so on. Maybe if you would bundle that, you could have a bigger scope to research such questions. All right, and this all sounds very European. If I hear you speaking, you're a reporter in Brussels. But we also know that the health systems are organized in a very national way, and there's also different financing mechanisms. And in the past, it has been really sensitive with member states, and also EU citizens didn't really see the need to Europeanize much in this field. So where do you currently see the biggest opposition to more coordinated EU action on health? And do you expect a convergence of these national health systems and policies as a result of the pandemic?
Well, I think it's pretty indisputable that capitals are the ones who have consistently been the most resistant. I mean, there's a reason that health policy wasn't really up to Brussels in the first place, which is it has a massive impact on the national budget. And also, you know, as far as citizens are concerned, national leaders are the ones who are most accountable to them if something goes wrong. And so I have to say I would be surprised, to be very frank, to see major changes. There is a push from some corners for treaty changes, but I think it's maybe more realistic to work within the confines of existing EU law to maybe beef up Brussels Health Authority. But at the same time, we see capitals don't want it. The Commission proposed massively expanding by the figures they proposed expanding by 2,000% their original budget proposal for health. Yeah. And capitals agreed to a little bit of a budget increase, but they pushed it down from, I think, 9 billion to 1.5 billion over 7 years. We also are not really seeing that much of a change as far as embrace of other efforts to coordinate on health policies at the EU level, such as, I apologize, I'm going to use the technical term, but something called health technology assessment, which is basically judging whether medicine, how well a new medicine or a new therapy works compared to what we had before. There's been a longstanding effort at the EU level to team up on that. And Germany, which we see pushing for a quote unquote health NATO, which we see pushing for more powers for the European Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Germany, along with France, they have been some of the biggest opponents of teaming up on some of these joint purchasing efforts and joint evaluation efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Thanks. So, so it may look as if, you know, that we see a huge leap forward in terms of Europeanization in the field of health, but there's always this member states that say, well, we also would like to have our own systems to judge which medical treatments work, our own institutes, our own politicians, health ministers that we trust. All right. I think probably we will discuss more about this. And I also wanted to check quickly with Remco if there's already specific questions for Sarah in the Q&A.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so we will encourage everybody who's participating. I see we have 80 people now in the Zoom, and we also have the people in YouTube that can now start to really think, you know, what they want to know and really puzzle with on front of EU health policy. Thank you, Sarah. Let's move actually to Anniek de Ruijter, and she's one of the perfect persons to talk about the competence issue, because she is a lawyer. She's an academic with deep knowledge of EU health and law and policy. She's currently working on a prestigious multi-year NWO grant, which basically is the Dutch Scientific Research Council. And if you get such a grant, then you know really that you become a famous professor all the way. And it's super interesting that her grant is specifically focusing on EU's health security efforts. And then came the pandemic.
Yeah.
So Anniek, in your work you have underlined that there is actually more EU health policy in place than is often realized, and that the lack of EU competence in the field of health has not prevented let's say, measures being taken, because so many health issues touch upon the internal market, on the 4 freedoms that were already touched upon. That if you are ill, you also want to be treated abroad. So a lot of things have already been organized. We already have a European Medicine Agency. So would you still see a need for an upgrade of this EU competence at this stage?
Yes, in the sense that I think that, but an upgrade of the competence doesn't mean, so normatively, yes, empirically, I agree with Sarah. I don't know if that is really what is in the cards for the EU, but I think that what is important is that, first of all, the current competence isn't super clear. That, for instance, it talks about incentive measures, but nobody really knows what exactly are incentive measures. I mean, if it's really carrots and sticks, it could be much stronger than how it's currently interpreted by policymakers. So I think that it's a very fragmented legal competence. And so there is room for improvement there. Also because, as you say, a lot of important health laws that have been adopted at EU level have other legal basis than the health basis itself. And then why should we care? Because it's in the end about the outcome of the policy. But health policy is a very particular type of policy that includes very special types of values, norms, such as specific fundamental rights, solidarity that you want to organize both at the level of in individual countries, but also between countries. So there's all kinds of specific health values. And you would want to have the legal space to organize along those values, and that would mean empowering the health experts. And so if you have, say, a legal basis in the internal market, this might actually empower a whole different DG to create laws, like the internal market DG, which is like the ministry of the market, or it might empower, not necessarily, but we've seen that in the discussions around the health services, when health was still part of the Services Directive, it moves from DG Markt to DG Health. There's a lot of unclarity about who is actually in charge of this policy domain. And then at some point, for aesthetic reasons, they add the health competence of 168. And so these types of discussions, I don't think they should be there in health. It's too important as a policy area. And in fact, if you create a stronger competence, you might see, on the basis of the health values that can be protected, so you don't have to protect agriculture because you're now legislating for health, you might see less EU health law. So there might be a different type of subsidiarity balancing, because we now say, actually, who can do this best? It might actually be best, as much of health policy is organized at local levels or decentral levels or at national level. It might be best to organize and legislate this not at EU level, but at the level of the member states, rather than it is now centralized because we're basing this policy on internal market law or on agriculture or whatever else.
So could ordinary EU citizens still gain from it? So there is now calls, also by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, that the competence issue at least should be discussed in this conference on the future of the EU that's called for, and that we also had 15 years ago, and then it led to the Lisbon Treaty. And this is the moment, but basically to discuss again what the EU is doing, what the member states are doing. I've really been wondering, let's say, what kind of proposals could the Commission then make, what it could not make today, and what could citizens gain from it if let's say, a decision could be taken under the health umbrella and not necessarily has to be refrained to the internal market competence or to the agricultural competence or food safety or other issues. And I find it very difficult to find an answer in these questions. Remco and I have been reading on this, but I was really wondering, let's say, what is behind this competence issue? What kind of substantive changes would that mean?
So I think in the end, legal competence is a political symbol of capacity and of political will. Because so in the end, it is not really about the legal competence. The legal competence comes after the political will and also the capacity building at EU level. And as long as that's not there, I mean, it's a symbolic discussion, really. And it only starts to have meaning when there's indeed, like you say, concrete changes. And for instance, this is why I was interested in studying health crisis after the swine flu. One of the major important issues of importance is redistribution in the area of health. That's where it gets political. Now, the EU has been regulating medicines, for instance, for a really long time. And the safety of medicines across borders is not really political. It's more of a scientific issue. It can become very political, but everything is politics. But it's not as political as access to medicines and redistribution of medicines, because it also, for redistribution, there's a lot of money involved. Now, after swine flu, you saw a big discussion about public procurement of pandemic vaccines. And I thought that was very interesting, a very interesting development. That is why I wanted to study health crisis in the EU further, because there you saw, and of course, it was still very much on the basis of contracting between, voluntary parties and of the member states, but you saw a little bit of a beginning of a possibility of joint procurement of medicines. If you have joint procurement, there's going to be a point that you're going to have to decide of who gets this medicine first when there's a crisis, which is exactly what you're seeing right now. And I was like, this is going to really come down to EU solidarity, because it might be that we all need the same medicine all at the same time. And how are we going to then redistribute, right? I mean, this would then come up with some kind of standard of medical need. And this is exactly where we're in right now. So, and I think that's where you can see, this is one of the areas where we can see an important possible change, because and at the same time it's very political and there's really a lot of resistance, and I know that, but the EU has such a long-standing track record in the area of medicines, and medicines have become such a global good. There's so many issues around shortages, not only when we're talking about pandemic vaccines, but when you talk about birth control, when you talk about generics and for instance antibiotics, and so or orphan medicines, where the EU has a very central authorizing power. So those are areas where I think it's just much more efficient to centrally organize the purchasing. And we've done a study in 5 different EU countries, and citizens don't really care where the medicines come from or who buys them, as long as they have access to them and they don't go to the pharmacy and they say, oh, there's no birth control pills, or you now only can get 1 strip and you have to come back next month because we're out, right? So this is where it would make a real difference to increase the purchasing power by organizing.
So Anniek, you studied the swine flu episode where the UK purchased all the vaccines and the other ones were left without anything, and now of course the whole system that is being put in place by the European Commission is exactly aiming to contain that. And you also talk about this influence the Commission is already having on medicines. I'm wondering if the Commission would negotiate on behalf of the whole of the EU on the price of medicines. Would that not be, a bigger bargaining power towards the pharmaceutical industries in comparison to the member states negotiating the price of medicine? I wonder, or are there other reasons for member states to say, no, we would like to prefer to do it ourselves, or in smaller coalitions of countries? Do you think, let's say, the whole experience now with the joint purchasing of the COVID vaccine will also potentially have a spillover effect, not only to other vaccines, but also to other medicines and other treatments?
Exactly. I mean, not now in the short term, but in the middle long term, that might be an interesting prospect, for instance, on orphan medicines or on some of those other areas that I just mentioned.
Orphan medicine, can you maybe explain?
That's medicines for rare diseases.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's only a limited number of people that have a particular disease, and so there's strength in numbers and efficiency in numbers because
these are usually super expensive medicine, that you have to have a treatment for 300,000 a year. Or
sometimes, sometimes those medicines are expensive. But so there's an obvious sort of economical gain that's quite obvious that you would do this together, but usually I don't think that is the. I mean, so there are shortages, and there is still sort of a competition between certain countries. There's also differences about what should be part of your basket of care in each of the countries. So there's political decisions that are made on that. And if the EU would then decide to purchase, and member state had committed to purchase through the EU system, that means that they lose some of that authority about their own baskets of care. And so, of course, the differences between the budgets in all the member states are vast. They're huge. So, I mean, there's then also sometimes the medicines are just not available for the whole of the EU at the same time. So there's also some member states might want to have the first buying options. So it's not as easy, but yes, I would say generally it of course for matters of price and for small diseases or rare diseases, it makes a whole lot of sense to do more things together. I just think that it's also important. A lot of people have a lot of critique about what's going on and how the EU should have done this or that. But if we see where we've come from,
we made huge leaps forward.
The new health transition to starting to purchase some medicines together, and the policy practices, the people need to learn to work together, all of that. From where we are now, it's a vast difference. It's a huge change. And so I think, and still the capacity in the EU is nothing in compared to what some of the member states have for themselves. So I think, it's good to be a little bit nuanced about those things.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Anniek. I'm going to look at Remco. Remco, are there already questions in the Q&A?
There are some questions, and I'd like to have Anna-Lena Kirch. She has a question that might be relevant for Anniek directly.
Okay. Can we bring her in? I look at the colleagues. Yeah, I see Anna-Lena Kirch. Anna-Lena, please, can you unmute yourself and pose your questions? Please keep it short and concise.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I was interested in hearing which member states or actors are actually pushing for treaty change in the realm of EU health policy.
All right, thank you so much. Anniek, can you answer this question?
I don't know any of them. I don't know. I don't know what member states are pushing for that. If anything, they might push for a little bit of a cleanup, for a neater article. For me as a lawyer, I would love that, but that is nothing. Like I said, I don't know right now what member states are pushing for that. I don't know any of them, but maybe somebody else knows.
Yeah, I think it's more a push from the European Commission and the European Parliament. So the Brussels-based institutions, but I guess there's also some backing from, let's say, the IDs by France and Germany to push for a more active EU health union, which they announced during this press conference on the recovery package, that they also announced that the EU should be more solid on health, and Germany is also in a way pushing for that. But as Sarah, I think, already pointed out, there's also some ambivalence in the degree to which a country like Germany really wants it and also can do it, because in Germany, and Remco knows this much better than I do, there is also this the lender that have health competences. So not everything is also in Germany with the federal state level.
In the past, from what I've seen, it seems to be, I'm now trying to check back in history, that most of the time when the health competence was expanded, it was because there was already stuff going on. And then later on, there was you know, another process going on, and they said, okay, hey, we're already doing this. Many times it was, let's put a little bit of a break on this. So let's create a legal basis. It wasn't always like, let's create more law. Sometimes, I mean, we have so many reiterations in the treaty that in the end, it's the member states that are responsible. So I think that usually it came after changes that had happened. And then we saw, okay, that member states came together and let's clean this up and create an actual legal basis, or let's clean this up and ensure that everybody, that we reiterate that in the end, it's the member states that deal with the organization of health services and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I hope that the others, we will come to the questions, but I would first like to give the floor to Sylvain Giraud. So he's head of unit at DG SANTE of the European Commission and has worked also in the past on international health policies. And currently he's responsible for the unit working on medical products, their quality, security and innovation. Sylvain, we're really pleased that you were able to join us from Brussels in the new lockdown situation. So experiencing COVID firsthand. Well, in the Netherlands, we're nearly in the same situation, but maybe, yeah, still slightly more liberal. What is, for the moment, I think Sarah and Anniek have already mentioned a few of the things, but what is the current focus of the EU health policy, and what are the areas where, in your view, where the COVID-19 has prompted most of a policy change? So where did the COVID really change your work and the work of your DG and the European Commission as such?
Thank you, Louise. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to join. Indeed, well, it's probably a bit early to really be able to talk about policy change, and because we're still in the middle of the crisis, as you just said, and to draw definitive conclusions as to what this crisis will have brought in terms of policy making and organization and institutional allocation of responsibilities and different aspects like this. What it surely has shown and has exposed the crisis is that there was a structural weakness in some of or most of the health systems across the EU, that there were vulnerabilities in the supply chains of certain critical products, and it has also shown that there is a lack of preparedness for crisis management. And I mean, on your question about policy changes, I see three trends that could potentially lead to policy changes. The first one is that clearly there seems to be now a stronger interest in working together at EU level to address common threats. I mean, for many people, this is just so obvious that you wonder why it took a crisis to make people understand that. But actually, it did take a crisis for people to understand that, because it is not so obvious for most, for many. Even if actually now I hear we talk about solidarity, the need to be more solidarity, to show solidarity, but it's not so much about solidarity, frankly speaking. It's just about protecting your interest, because it's in working together that you actually better protect your interest than by going separately. So it's just the need for people to change their software in a way and understand that, you know, this is, and in this crisis is a way of making the experiment that what you call the nationalism, or did you call this corona nationalism, is actually not working. So I don't come back to what was said. The second trend is that the crisis has actually shown that health systems and their resilience and health protection and health coverage and health insurance are fundamental for the economy, and that when they're not working well, that can have very big consequences, socioeconomic ones. And that in a way, this has actually brought further or supported or promoted some the political narrative around, you know, health is wealth, health is a factor of production, health is a. It was very strong at the beginning of the crisis, this narrative among the politicians and then the political leaders. I hope maybe I should not express a view of my own, but it might actually be that it's not so strong anymore. But clearly there is something about a new narrative around health expenditure are good expenditure, public expenditure in health should be supported, it's building for the future, it's investing in the future, etc., which is a bit of a new narrative compared to a few years ago. And the third trend I see is that we would need to build or rebuild the health sovereignty of the EU. We should strengthen our strategic autonomy. We should address our dependencies. We should look at our the vulnerabilities of our supply chain. And we should. So this is a third narrative or third trend in public discourse that is also bringing the call for new types of action, etc. Well, I don't know. I can just tell you before I finished that you know, the Commission has announced a certain number of action now. I mean, every day we are actually announcing action because there are some longer term ones, shorter term ones. I mean, all this is very well documented on our website, so we can go into the details. Some announcements were made by the President herself in her speech on the State of the Union a few weeks ago. But I'd just like to refer to what happened last week, because they in a way exemplify what was just saying in the way EU leaders communicated. So last week they had an EU Council, an informal one, video conference, where they get together and I think they wanted to show, this is now my personal analysis, not of a Commission official. I think they wanted to show that, you know, definitely they are this time they have learned that they want to work together and they want to be communicating on the fact that they work together. So they sort of all published tweets of all sorts and things to say, even, well, maybe I shouldn't say even with this audience, but the Dutch Prime Minister, I don't know if you saw his tweet on Thursday, but it still starts with the need to say, because that's what he says, though each country organizes their own health care system, that's the start. I mean, this needs to be said, you know, even what comes next, you first need to remind everyone that this is a national competence. And then he goes on and says, we must work together where we can to tackle the pandemic, for instance, when it comes to the exchange of knowledge, distribution of medicines and vaccines, etc. So I think this is actually interesting, the way this communication is actually coming out. Just another example is what the President of the European Council said in his newsletter, also an interesting words used there. Then again, first sentence starts, of course, health is primarily a matter for the member states and even the regions. However, this crisis has already demonstrated that no single country can tackle the situation on its own. And then comes the competence and questions. So that now I quote again Charles Michel. And questions regarding competence cannot be allowed to impede essential action. When the flood waters are rising, it's no time to discuss who should fetch the buckets. I think this is interesting in the way they want to communicate now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. I also appreciate so much what you say about the costs of healthcare, and that it's also very costly if you don't act on healthcare, because especially in our country, we have, you know, the health insurance are privatized, and we had such an extremely lean and mean system in the Netherlands that we really suffered from it with so few ICU units in the hospitals. And whereas on paper, we were doing very good with regard to the international health regulations. So on paper, we were super well prepared for the pandemic, but in reality, we had to bring patients to Germany, which were so generous to have their capacity opened up also for citizens from other, for patients from other countries. So those, thank you, and also for sharing your views on these other three trends. Can you also tell us a little bit more about to what extent EU member states already collaborate in the field of medicines R&D and admission to the European market and purchasing and price setting? because I'm not sure, let's say, if it's very familiar for the audience, and this is really your field. So we know that we had a huge fight with Italy about the hosting of the European Medicine Agency, but I don't think many people in the Netherlands know what the European Medicine Agency is actually doing and how it works, for instance.
Yeah, it's actually a bit complicated to explain in just a few words, but what I would say is that in the area of medicines, there are complex interaction between elements of strong integration in the internal market for the functioning of it, but also some elements of fragmentation, which are due to the fact that health systems are national and they are different, and that health and medicines are products like no other. Just the way they get on the market, the way research and development of new vaccines is financed also from public research, the way at the end of pipe the products are actually paid or reimbursed in most cases mainly strongly by public budget or solidarity budget. And so, I mean, just this makes it very different from maybe other products. I mean, all products are specific and there are specificities for cars as well, I'm sure. But when it comes to medicines, I think all of us can well understand why this is special and why the internal market is actually not the same as it is for even food products, for example. So some products are authorized centrally. There is a very well-developed regulatory system, so it's authorized by the Commission on the basis of a scientific opinion and an opinion from the European Medicines Agency, now based in Amsterdam, on the safety of the product and its efficacy. But when it comes to, and then there's some regulatory system at EU level to incentivize innovation, to reward innovation with exclusivity, with limited competition to protect innovation and intellectual property. And there's also a lot of EU level sub-fundings that go into supporting research. But there's also then these elements of fragmentation and where products do actually circulate between countries, but not so much. Because they are actually prepared and supplied for a specific market, because they are actually bought by public authorities and that not by private, not always by private wholesale chains. And there are public procurement for the products are the most expensive products. The most important ones are not distributed through community pharmacies. They're distributed by hospitals. So again, a different kind of supply, which makes it difficult also to circulate the same way other products would circulate. And then there's still a lot of products that are actually authorized nationally for the national market in a given presentation that is just for the national market. Mm-hmm. So the crisis has really highlighted the need to reinforce to be looking at some of the vulnerabilities of the system in terms of availability, in terms of accessibility, in terms of affordability. Those were already there before, but through this crisis, I think this is a step forward we want to make in the next few days with a policy paper we're going to issue on the EU pharmaceutical strategy, where we propose to look at the sort of vulnerabilities in this overall system that existed before the crisis, how they've been further exposed by this crisis, and try to take that further through legislative action, non-legislative action, cooperation with the member states. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, I think it's super interesting what you mentioned, the EU pharmaceutical strategy that's indeed forthcoming, and many are looking into that. Also, of course, the big lobbies in Brussels, big commercial interests at stake. And you already touched upon this issue of what people call health sovereignty, and also reshoring production and essential products to the EU. Is this really going to be the answer? Aren't we in the globalized world, let's say, beyond this idea that we can still, produce things? Or is the interdependencies, or are there other ways that we can influence, let's say, these supply chains that you just referred to? Could you say a few more words about this issue?
Yeah, it's actually become quite a commonplace to say that there's something needs to be done, and that actually all over the place people talking about this at very high level. The European Council in October. In their conclusions, they said the quote is achieving strategic autonomy while preserving an open economy. This is, they said, a key objective of the Union. And they actually asked the Commission to identify strategic dependencies in industrial ecosystems, and in particular for health products. They said they also asked the Commission to look at what measures could be taken in terms of diversifying production and supply chains, in terms of strategic stockpiling, and in terms of fostering production and investment in Europe. The Commission has also announced that would be looking at some of these as part of the pharma strategy, and we'll be looking also at this possibly in the longer run with the establishment of the structure called, the EU-like or the EU-like BARDA, or the EU version of a US BARDA that Sarah already mentioned. So there's also a European Parliament resolution that says that we need to be looking at that. But what I think is important in this political discourse is that it might not be so straightforward in terms of policy making. I think we still need to demonstrate, generate the evidence that the vulnerabilities we're talking about are due to this supposed or argued what is argued as being the dependency to certain countries, and whether actually reshoring, repatriating, or developing manufacturing in Europe would be the way forward. I mean, it looks like a very good idea, obviously, and everyone jumped into this, but I think we still need to develop a better understanding of the facts and the evidence. Today, the public authorities don't have this overview of the supply chain, because at least when it comes to the health authorities, this was never our job to do that. Our job was to ensure safety, quality, that people actually don't die from medicines, and that they get the medicines they need to be cured or to improve their health. So the information we have is about that. We have all sorts of databases and information, but this is not about volumes. It's not about numbers. It's not about that type of data that are needed to reorganize a supply chain. So we have to start again with this new policy, and really make sure that the measures we're taking do actually address the public health objective. I mean, there might be other people that have other objectives, like an industrial one, but for health authorities, the focus is on public health. So if these are measures that ultimately improve public health, yes, probably they need to be considered.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Of course, also a lot of these big multinationals are headquartered somewhere, but then they have branches everywhere, and it's not so clear. And then they do the testing elsewhere, and it's not so clear where exactly you should attribute them, or and also they employ people in many different countries.
Yeah, and also they export products, and a lot of countries in the world are actually dependent on the EU for their medicines, but that dependency we kind of accept, and actually we kind of promote.
Yeah, that's also in our interest. So he would close down, and others may say, but you're actually the exporter of this. All right, Remco, let's go to you. Let's see if that we can open up, and what kind of questions people in the audience ask in the Q&A.
Yes, there are several questions, and I'll ask Alexander Conway to ask his question, which is also more about the geopolitical tensions that are there within the EU vis-a-vis other countries. Alexander.
Great.
Hi, thanks very much for taking my question. It's more on the, again, geopolitical side, I think is quite accurate.
Oh, Alexander, I don't think we can hear you very well.
Oh.
Maybe Remco, we can go back to you and have you pose the question.
Yeah, if that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, Alexander. Yeah.
Question is, does the panel have any thoughts on Hungary's apparent negotiations with Russia for access to Russian COVID vaccine? Could this undermine the Europeanization of health policy, similar to the way Turkey's purchases of Russian military hardware undermined NATO cooperation?
A very sensitive question. I don't think we can allow the whole panel to answer it, because otherwise we won't be able to address the other questions. But maybe Sarah, would you like to say something about this? That would be great.
Yes, this is something I find super interesting. So we're seeing all of the superpowers basically sort of using vaccines as a soft power tool. So we're seeing Russia and China as well talk about how they are going to provide the vaccine to kind of countries in their sphere of influence. Likewise, the EU actually really has created a position of moral leadership relative to the United States, which has kind of become the boogeyman as far as vaccine nationalism. President Trump has focused on securing vaccines for the United States without engaging in global efforts, whereas the EU has said, oh, yes, we're buying vaccines for European citizens, but we're also donating or lending some money to the COVAX facility, which is a WHO, a World Health Organization run effort to give vaccines to the rest of the world. It's a little questionable whether how much that will actually end up helping those other countries, but it's at least at minimum a symbolic gesture and almost certainly better than nothing. But absolutely, Russia is way out ahead in the vaccine race. We don't know if the vaccine works. I believe they have just applied for pre-qualification, which means approval from the World Health Organization. So we may finally start seeing some data. But yeah, it's extremely provocative that Hungary is lining up with this possible effort. I think it would break the EU's rules for their advanced purchasing as well. But look, again, national leaders are accountable to their citizens. And especially if Orban is in general playing himself off of Brussels, it's in his interest to say, look, I wanted to get you all the vaccines possible. And so I'm talking to Brussels, but I'm also talking to Putin. For his domestic politics, that works great. For Putin's politics, that works great. So there you go.
Wow. Yeah, I wasn't aware that it was already going so quick, but this is an amazing development indeed. Alexander, also thank you for pointing that out. Remco, are there other issues in the chat?
Yes, there was also a forward-looking question by Susanne Bergner from Germany, who would like to pose her question. Susanne, the floor is yours.
Hi, Susan. Good to see you. Remco and I also published a policy brief with Susanne and her colleague Maaike Vos at Stiftungschaft und Politik, but that's more on EU World Health Organization relations. Susan, please.
Yeah, thank you. So my question would be actually a broader one. If the COVID-19 crisis can be used as a step towards European integration in general through the field of health. I'm asking this question because we have seen the EU go, well, not so well through the Euro crisis. We have seen that the EU is struggling with the migration crisis. So could then the health crisis be a field where the EU could really come out stronger and show solidarity and greater effort in European integration? That is my question. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Susan. I think that we have witnessed also with the topic of climate change, that it was really embraced. It was so clear that member states could not tackle it on their own, and it had to be done on the European level. And it was also used in a way to justify the European integration projects at times, regardless of the need also to act on that field. But is there anyone of the speakers, maybe you can raise your hand if you would like to answer this question? Anniek, yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think it's not the first time that health is offered as one of the areas where the EU could really show an added benefit, which is of course always a good reason for more integration. It's done that in the 90s. That's been part of the discussion in the 80s already. So this discussion has come back, and I think it's a really good point to make. I just think that, you know, the whole European project right now is not so much, I mean, maybe, and this might be a sign of sort of a growing up or adulthood. It's not necessarily so much about deepening integration just because, you know, this idea of an ever closer union, and a lot of people are now talking about, you know, different modes of integration, and so I think it's actually a lot more nuanced. There's not only one direction for the EU, which is necessarily more integration. There is a lot about better cooperation, ensuring, you know, some of the core values of the EU, which is living together well, improving well-being of its citizens, etc., improving European values, and all that other stuff that binds us. But that doesn't the means through which we do that doesn't necessarily mean more integration. And I think that so this whole idea of the European Union and how it should work, or what its development is for the future, is a lot more nuanced. And I do think it's I do have kind of a positive feeling about what's going on and what this will bring. In the past, we've seen that crises do bring more integration. I think this time we'll see a more nuanced type of response. Yeah,
because it's also so big in comparison to what has happened previously. Remco, other questions?
Yes, from Jan Willem Schrijgrond, and I think it's for Sylvain, which is more about strategic sovereignty. I don't know if Jan Willem Schrijgrond in the panel.
Yeah, Jan Willem, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you okay.
Thanks, yes. So the question is, strategic autonomy or sovereignty relies on data sovereignty and data sharing in the EU. However, we see that healthcare data is not available for R&D or for citizens or for providers at the EU level in a similar way as it is available in the US or in China. So we are at a significant disadvantage there because we can't pool the data. The European health data space is a welcome initiative, but will it be ambitious enough to allow the EU to be a leader in healthcare innovation? And if you like, to really strengthen the healthcare resilience? And if I can add a point to that, last week Ursula von der Leyen announced that in the Corona recovery package, we should be sharing data more across the borders to learn about treatment options. Now, companies like Philips sit on thousands of data from patients that on the vital signs on how they've been treated during COVID in the ICUs. But we can't unlock it, we can't disclose it, we can't share it because of European legislation. So the data is potentially there. We could learn on how to treat patients better, but it is locked up.
Wow, yeah, so that has also to do with this privacy issues of the patients and the EU being very strong in comparison to the US and China. We just published a lot of stuff on data and digital policies. And usually we use that as a good example that the EU is so strong on that. But this might be an example where it's not so useful. And that we need to see ways that we can go around these privacy issues. Sylvain, would you be able to answer that question? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to be careful on this issue because, you know, if there is a legislation at EU level on data privacy and on protection of data, this is not just to prevent, as it was said, the possibility for research to access data. This is to protect privacy. This is also because this was felt by the EU legislator that this was actually needed, and actually this is also a request that comes quite strongly from the civil society, including from patient organizations themselves. So I think we need to see how data privacy and data protection can and should be combined with the opportunity that is needed to use data and to use health data that are generated by the health systems to improve the management of the systems. And it's largely the case in many countries already, or to develop new products, even if, of course, the basis for new products would need to remain randomized clinical trials. These are the way that what we want to do indeed, and this was announced by the president. It's in the roadmap that was given to our commissioner. It is part of the initiatives that we've announced we will take around the data and health data, with what you mentioned is the European health data space. So clearly it's not an easy way, it's not easy to answer this question, but and now to answer your question, which is whether it will be ambitious enough, well, that will remain to be seen, but clearly the issue are there, the challenges are there, and we intend to tackle them at EU level. And I want to insist, because I'm using this expression at EU level. When I say at EU level, like many cases, it doesn't mean at the Commission. It means working together between the member states, working together at EU level. Thank you.
So yeah, wow, we also see different governance modes here, and the EU being stronger if member states also are stronger and cooperate more among each other. That's, I think, a repeating theme throughout this conference. Europe caught in polycrisis. I'm afraid we also have to stop here, because we already filled the complete hour, and we promise our viewers at Clingendael that if we say that we have an hour in a webinar, we also stick to the hour. And we know that people have started to rely on that. That being said, I also wanted to mention to everybody this webinar will still be able, you will still be able to view this webinar on YouTube later on. And I would like to really thank all the viewers and especially the speakers, also my colleague Remco, for participating. I learned a great deal, and I think this topic is super fascinating, and I hope that we can continue to work on it and explore it further. It has so many interesting angles and also so many issues that still are underexplored. So I'm looking forward, Anniek and Sarah, to read your work, to see what the Commission comes up with in the pharmaceutical strategy. And I hope also to see you back at other events that we're organizing on EU health and international health, global health policy. Thank you for now, and yeah, we hope to stay in touch. Bye-bye.